He married her for a deal. She stayed for his heart. If you believe that love can only be born out of honesty, stay with this story until the end. It is about two strangers who signed a marriage contract for survival and somehow found themselves learning how to be real again. Do not forget to subscribe, and let us go back to where it all began with her. The air inside the immigration office was dry and cold, smelling faintly of printer ink and disinfectant. Lila Tran sat on the metal bench, clutching a folder of sketches that had nothing to do with visas. She was a painter, or at least she had been, before her last exhibition was canceled when people believed she had stolen donation money meant for war veterans. It was not true, but in America, a rumor could close doors faster than a storm. Across the hallway, the glass doors opened with a soft hiss. Adrian Cole stepped inside, tall, pressed suit, phone in hand. To everyone else, he was the founder of a humanitarian tech foundation, the kind of man who made headlines for saving others. But today, his jaw was tight. His foundation was under federal audit, and the investigators were circling closer every day. He needed a legal form of protection, someone whose silence he could trust. When his lawyer introduced them, it was almost absurd. "She is clean, quiet. Her record helps your image," the lawyer whispered. "And what does she get?" Adrian asked. "Stability. Her visa expires in 3 weeks." That was the moment Lila looked up. Their eyes met his gray, calculating, hers dark and cautious. "You want to marry a stranger?" she said, her voice dry. "I want to marry an artist who understands contracts," he replied. The proposal was written in neat paragraphs. 6 months of legal marriage, mutual protection, no physical involvement, no emotional entanglement. Everything sounded clinical, perfect for people who no longer believed in tenderness. Yet, when she signed her name, her hand trembled slightly, leaving a thin streak of ink across the word honest. Outside, the wind blew down West 47th Street, scattering a page from her sketchbook. Adrian bent down to pick it up. It was a charcoal drawing of 2 figures sitting under a bridge, one holding a coffee cup, the other painting the light that fell on his hands. There was something unbearably human in that small gesture. "Do you always draw people?" he asked. "Only when they forget someone is watching," she answered. He nodded once, folding the paper carefully before returning it to her. "You will live in my apartment downtown. It will look real. That is all that matters." She looked at him for a long second, then said quietly, "Real is not something you can fake, Mr. Cole. Glamour." That night under the skyline of Manhattan, 2 signatures bound a deal that neither of them truly understood. Somewhere between the ink and the silence, a question began to hum, a question neither of them could voice yet. What if honesty itself was the thing they were both running from? And as the city lights flickered below their separate windows, both wondered, for the first time in years, what it would cost to finally tell the truth. The apartment Adrian provided was in the heart of downtown Manhattan. Every line of its architecture felt intentional, controlled much like the man himself. Lila stepped through the doorway carrying nothing but a small suitcase and a portfolio of unfinished paintings. The marble floors reflected her cautious steps. On the kitchen island lay a folder marked Contractual Agreement, Confidential. She opened it. Inside were the rules that would define their days together. Rule 1. Maintain a believable appearance of marriage in public. Rule 2. Share residence but separate bedrooms. Rule 3. No personal interference in each other's work. Rule 4. No emotional involvement of any kind. She read them twice. Every sentence was sharp, almost surgical. "You have written this like a machine," she said. Adrian was pouring himself black coffee, sleeves rolled to his elbows. "Machines do not misunderstand. People do," he replied without looking up. There was a small pause. The silence between them was thick, not hostile, just heavy, with unspoken histories. Lila placed her suitcase by the guest room door. "Where should I hang my paintings?" she asked quietly. He looked up, surprised. "Anywhere but my office." "Then I will choose the living room," she said. In the following days, their lives settled into an odd rhythm. They shared a breakfast table but not a conversation. They walked together through charity events, smiling for cameras, every gesture rehearsed. Yet sometimes, the act slipped. During one gala, a child approached Lila, tugging on her dress. "Are you the lady who paints the veterans?" The innocence in the voice caught Adrian off guard. He glanced at her, but she only smiled gently and crouched down to answer. "I paint anyone who still remembers how to feel." The photographers caught that moment. It would later appear in every newspaper under the caption, "The Human Face of Coltech." That evening back at the apartment, he spoke first. "You handled that well." "I did not handle it," she said, washing paintbrushes in the sink. It was real for a moment. You should try it sometime. He wanted to argue, but stopped. For a brief second, the sound of the running water filled the space where pride usually lived. Days became weeks. Lila began sketching again, setting up a small corner by the window where morning light pooled over her canvas. Adrian often passed behind her on his way to the office, glancing at the colors she mixed. There was always warmth in her work, something he could not name. One night, returning late, he found her asleep on the couch. On the coffee table sat a half-finished painting of two figures back to back, their shadows almost touching. Next to it lay her phone, screen glowing with a message from her former student. "The studio is reopening. They miss you." He watched her breathing, slow and even, the kind of peace he could never buy. Then his gaze fell on the contract folder still lying on the shelf, its edges curling from humidity. For the first time, he wondered if rules could keep people safe or just lonely. The next morning, as they rode the elevator together, Lila broke the silence. "Why did you really choose me?" He hesitated, eyes fixed on the mirrored door. "Because you do not lie easily." She turned to him, voice calm but cutting. "Then why are you teaching me to?" The elevator chimed. The doors opened to the bright lobby, full of people who believed in their marriage. They stepped out, side by side, perfect strangers bound by a truth neither dared to say out loud. That day, somewhere between the flash of cameras and the echo of applause, both of them realized something dangerous. Pretending to be honest had begun to feel more natural than being honest itself. The autumn wind swept through Manhattan, painting the streets with bronze leaves. Inside the apartment, the warmth of the city never seemed to reach them. Lila spent most mornings painting near the wide window, her strokes soft but restless. Adrian buried himself in meetings and endless calls with auditors, trying to keep his foundation from collapsing under suspicion. One evening, he returned home early, to find her sitting at the dining table, surrounded by envelopes. She was opening letters addressed to his office thank-you notes, from people his foundation had supposedly helped. Some were genuine, some clearly scripted by public relations. Her hands paused on one. "This woman writes that your donation saved her daughter's therapy," Lila said, looking up. "But I checked the date. Your company posted that press release 2 days before the donation was made. It was all for the cameras." Adrian took the letter from her and set it aside. "The world runs on stories, not facts. We give people something to believe in." She met his gaze without blinking. "And who gives you something to believe in?" The question lingered like dust in sunlight. He wanted to dismiss it, but something in her tone was different, quiet, piercing. She was not accusing, she was seeing him. That night the apartment felt too silent. Adrian sat in his study, staring at a report that detailed every legal loophole keeping his foundation alive. His reflection in the window looked older, harder. Then, a sound broke through the stillness music. Lila was humming in the living room, painting again. He walked out to find her barefoot, surrounded by colors. The canvas glowed with layers of blue and gold. "It is called silence," she said without looking up. "It is about the noise we make when we are afraid of ourselves." He folded his arms, unsure whether to laugh or listen. "You think I am afraid?" She rinsed her brush. "Everyone who hides behind rules is afraid." Her words unsettled him. For a moment, he saw his own walls reflected in her calmness. She did not pity him, and that, somehow, was more disarming than kindness. The next day, during a charity board meeting, Adrian found himself distracted. Reporters asked about his inspiring wife, the artist who softened his image. He smiled for them, but behind the practiced expression was a quiet irritation because, for the first time, the lie began to matter. When the meeting ended, he called Lila. "There is an event tomorrow at the Veterans Art Center. They expect us both." She hesitated. "Is it another photo opportunity?" "It is a donation ceremony." "Labo." "Then I will come if it means something to them, not to your investors," she said, and ended the call. The next evening she arrived in a simple navy dress, hair tied loosely. The Veterans Center was smaller than she expected, bare walls, faded flags, a handful of people painting in silence. She walked among them, stopping beside an elderly man whose hands trembled as he tried to hold a brush. She knelt and guided his hand gently. "Let the paint move for you," she whispered. The old man smiled through tears. Cameras flashed, but she never looked up. Adrian watched from across the room, something tightening in his chest. Later, as they drove home, he finally spoke. "You did not have to do that." "I know," she said softly. "That is why it mattered." The car moved through the city lights, their reflections flashing like brief truths between them. For the first time, Adrian realized the contract was no longer protecting him, it was exposing him. That night, when he passed her painting corner, he saw a new canvas drying under the lamp. Two figures stood on opposite sides of a glass wall, both reaching out, almost touching. Beneath it, she had written in small, deliberate letters, "Honesty hurts less when it is shared." And somewhere deep inside him, a wall began to crack. Winter arrived early that year. The city lights shimmered against the frost, and the sound of distant car horns echoed through the glass walls of their apartment. Adrian came home later than usual, his coat still damp from the snow. Lila was in the kitchen, wrapping a canvas with brown paper. The apartment smelled of turpentine and cinnamon tea. "You sold another painting," he said, setting his briefcase down. She nodded, not looking up. "A small one, enough to buy new brushes." He smiled faintly. "Congratulations." The silence that followed was not hostile. It was heavier, like two people standing at the edge of something they did not yet understand. Adrian walked toward the window, staring at the snow-covered skyline. "The audit ends next month. Once it clears, the marriage ends too." Lila's hands froze on the paper. "I know." He turned, noticing the faint tremor in her voice. "Has this been difficult for you?" She hesitated. "Not difficult, just strange. Living in a place that looks like home but never feels like it." Kadoshi. Her words hit him harder than he expected. He wanted to say something, anything, but instead poured himself a glass of water and sat across from her. For a long while, they said nothing. The city hummed below them, 1,000 anonymous stories passing by their window. Finally, she broke the quiet. "Do you ever miss being ordinary?" He looked puzzled. "Ordinary?" "Yes. Before the interviews, before the press, before every smile had to be measured." Once Adrian stared into the glass in his hand, watching the reflection of the ceiling lights ripple. "I would not even know how to begin." Lila smiled gently. "Then let me show you." She pulled on a coat and handed him another. Minutes later, they stepped out into the snow, walking without direction. They ended up in a small diner on the corner of 7th Avenue, a place that smelled like pancakes and burnt coffee. The waitress recognized neither of them. They sat in a booth near the window, hands wrapped around steaming mugs. "This is what people do," she said softly. "They talk about their day, they complain about the cold, and they laugh for no reason." He watched her as she spoke, noticing how her laughter filled the empty space between them. It was the first time he saw her not as a contract, but as a person alive, unguarded, real. When they returned home, the elevator stopped halfway due to a sudden power outage. The lights flickered, leaving them in half-darkness. Lila leaned against the wall, calm despite the hum of machinery. "So this is what the universe calls timing," she said with a nervous smile. He laughed, low and genuine. "Afraid? No? You?" "I used to be afraid of silence," he admitted. "But lately, it feels like the only place I can breathe." The elevator jolted, then stopped completely. The emergency lights glowed faint red. She looked at him, her face illuminated in the dimness. "Then breathe," she whispered. He did. For a moment, it was quiet, only the sound of their breath and the faint ticking of time. When the elevator started again, neither moved. Something had changed, subtle but irreversible. Later that night, back in the apartment, Lila stood by the window, the city's reflection flickering across her face. Adrian approached slowly, his voice almost uncertain. "Thank you." "For what?" "For reminding me what honesty feels like." "Numalai." She turned to face him, eyes soft but steady. "Honesty is not always gentle, Adrian." "I know," he said quietly, "but I would rather feel something real than keep living inside a lie." Outside, snow kept falling quiet, relentless, covering the city that had forgotten how to pause. And inside that glass tower, two people who had once agreed to feel nothing began, without meaning to learn how to feel everything. By mid-January, the snow outside the Cole residence turned gray from city soot, melting into long rivers along the curb. Inside, life between Adrian and Lila had shifted. The air was lighter now, the silence less sharp. They no longer rehearsed smiles before stepping into public. Sometimes the laughter came first, and the cameras merely followed. One morning, a magazine article appeared online. Its headline read, "The Human Side of Adrian Cole." The photo below captured him looking at Lila as she spoke to a group of children at the Veterans Art Center. It was not staged. His expression, tired but soft, betrayed something no contract could define. At breakfast, Lila placed the tablet on the table. "Did you see this?" Adrian glanced down. "Public relations will love it." She tilted her head. "And you?" He took a slow sip of coffee. "I am not sure I like people assuming they know me." "Dozen." Then stop living a story they can write for you, she said gently. That day, Lila went back to the center. It had become her refuge, a place where honesty was the only language that mattered. She taught art classes for veterans recovering from trauma. Some could not speak much, but they painted stories in bold colors: grief, laughter, loss, hope. She felt alive there. Later that evening, Adrian surprised her by arriving unannounced. He stood by the door, watching her guide a young veteran who had lost the use of one hand. She helped him steady the brush, her patience endless. The veteran laughed as a streak of blue paint splashed across the canvas. Adrian felt something tighten in his chest. This was not performance. It was purpose. For the first time, he saw what she meant by real. After class, as they locked the center, she said, "You should join next time. Everyone has something to paint." "Lot, I would not know where to start," he said. "Start with what hurts," she replied. That night, they walked through the park. Street musicians played an old jazz tune. The sound floated between them like memory. "You know," she said softly, "I used to believe love was only for people who earned it, the ones who had not made mistakes." "And now?" he asked. "Now I think love is what teaches you not to make the same ones twice." He looked at her, realizing how easily her words disarmed him. The next morning, his assistant called. "The auditors have found inconsistencies in the Foundation's foreign accounts. They want an immediate explanation." Adrian's pulse quickened. He turned to see Lila standing by the doorway, her sketchbook in hand. "Is everything all right?" she asked. "Nothing I cannot handle," he said, forcing calm. But as soon as she left the room, he opened his laptop. The reports confirmed his fear. Someone inside his board had been using charity funds for private gain, and the trail led directly back to his name. If the story broke, it would destroy everything, including her reputation, now tied publicly to his. That evening, as Lila painted in the living room, he watched her in silence. She hummed softly, unaware of the storm brewing behind his eyes. For the first time, he understood the cost of the life he had built: the walls, the masks, the distance. When she looked up, smiling faintly, he forced himself to smile back. But the words forming in his mind were heavy, almost foreign. "If I tell her the truth, she will leave. If I do not, I will lose her anyway." The line between honesty and survival blurred once again, and Adrian Cole, who had built his empire on control, realized he was standing on the edge of something he could not control at all. The storm that had been building finally arrived. Rain swept against the tall windows of their apartment, turning the skyline into a blur of light and shadow. Lila stood at her easel, finishing a painting of two hands reaching across water. She did not hear Adrian enter until he spoke. "You should stop for tonight. The power might go out," he said quietly. She turned, smiling faintly. "If I stop now, I will forget what the colors mean." He took a step closer, holding a folder. His face was pale, the lines around his mouth drawn tight. "There is something I have to tell you." Lila sensed the shift in his tone. "All right," she said, setting down her brush. Adrian opened the folder and laid out a series of documents: financial reports, emails, and statements. "The auditors found a trail of money transfers. They think I created fake accounts to hide funds. It is not true, but the evidence points to me." She scanned the papers, her eyes narrowing. "Someone inside your company did this?" "Yes. Someone who wanted control of the Foundation, but the media will not care who did it. They will care that my wife is tied to the man they believe stole from veterans." She stared at him, realizing the magnitude of his fear. "You are worried about me?" "I am worried about what this will do to you," he admitted. "Your name, your work, everything you have built." Lila walked to the window, watching the rain hit the glass. "You built your life on protecting your image. Maybe this is your chance to protect something real instead." He hesitated. "You do not understand, Lila. If I come forward, they will shut everything down. Hundreds of people will lose their jobs." She turned to face him, her eyes steady. "And if you stay silent, how many more will lose their faith in you?" The silence stretched between them, heavy and alive. Then the lights flickered, plunging the room into darkness. The only sound was the steady rhythm of rain. Adrian exhaled slowly. "When I started the Foundation, I told myself I was doing it to help people, but somewhere along the way, it became about control, about not being the man I was before I had money." She stepped closer, her voice soft. "Then maybe honesty is how you find him again." The thunder outside rolled like a heartbeat. He looked at her, his defenses stripped bare. "You make it sound easy." "It is not easy," she said. "It is human." He took her hand, slowly, uncertainly. For the first time, there was no contract, no cameras, no audience. Just two people standing in the half-dark, listening to the storm. "I do not know what happens next," he confessed. "Then start with the truth," she whispered. "Let the world see who you really are." For a long moment he said nothing. Then he pulled her into his arms, not as an act of comfort but of surrender. The rain outside intensified, drumming against the glass, drowning out the city. Later that night, when she had gone to bed, Adrian remained by the window, the documents spread before him. He dialed his lawyer, his voice steady. "Prepare a statement," he said. "We go public in the morning." He ended the call and looked down at one of Lila's paintings resting against the wall. It showed a city reflected in water, the reflection brighter than the skyline itself. He traced a finger along the paint, whispering almost to himself, "Let them see me, even if it breaks me." In the silence that followed, the storm began to ease. Somewhere between fear and truth, Adrian Cole finally began to become the man he was supposed to be. The morning after the storm was colder than anyone expected. The air felt clean, almost cruel, the way truth often does. Adrian stood in front of a sea of microphones at the press conference his legal team had arranged. Behind him, the banner of the Cole Foundation hung heavy, the colors too bright against the gray light. He began without notes. "There have been accusations regarding the misuse of our charitable funds," he said, his voice steady but low. "Those claims are being investigated, and I take full responsibility for the failures in oversight that led here. I will not defend what cannot be defended. I can only promise that transparency begins now." The reporters erupted with questions, their voices overlapping. Someone shouted, "Is it true your wife helped you cover the transfers?" Another called out, "Are you protecting her?" Adrian met their gaze. "My wife is not part of this investigation. She has done nothing but show me what integrity looks like." Cameras flashed. Every word was being recorded, dissected, analyzed. But in that moment, he did not care about damage control. He cared about saying the one thing that had kept him awake all night. "She made me better than I was." Back at the apartment, Lila watched the broadcast alone. The light from the television flickered across her face. There was no triumph in her expression, only quiet heartbreak. She knew what his confession would cost him: contracts, investors, reputation. Yet she also knew it was the only way he could ever be free. Hours later, when he returned home, the city was buzzing with news. His board had suspended him temporarily. His phone was flooded with messages from reporters. He turned it off before walking through the door. Lila was waiting by the window, her coat already on. "They will come here soon," she said. "I know," he replied. "You need space to fix this. And I need space to paint again, somewhere without cameras." He wanted to ask her to stay, but the words caught in his throat. "Lila," he said quietly, "I never meant for you to be part of this." She smiled sadly. "We do not choose the stories that save us, Adrian. We only choose how they end." She handed him a small canvas wrapped in brown paper. "Do not open it now. Open it when you forget why you started all this." Then she left, her footsteps fading down the hallway. He stood there, holding the painting, feeling the weight of silence settle over the room. For the next few days, the headlines spread. Cole confesses. Charity scandal. The marriage built on lies. Reporters camped outside his building. Yet, in the chaos, something unexpected happened. Letters began arriving again. This time, they were not scripted. Veterans, teachers, and strangers wrote to thank him for admitting the truth. They said his honesty gave them courage. One evening, unable to sleep, Adrian finally unwrapped the canvas she had given him. It was a simple painting of two doors, one open, one closed. Light spilled from the open door, illuminating footprints that led away. Beneath it, a single line in her handwriting read, "Honesty is where love learns to breathe." He placed the painting on the wall above his desk, then sat back in the dark, the city lights glimmering through the window. For the first time in years, he felt no need to control the story. The silence no longer frightened him. It simply told him what she had always known: truth, even when it breaks you, is still the only thing worth keeping. 3 months passed. The city shifted from the gray of winter to the fragile bloom of spring. Adrian no longer wore suits to hide behind. He spent most mornings volunteering at a local community center, sorting donated supplies, helping veterans fill out job applications. The Cole Foundation had been restructured under new leadership, but he stayed on as an unpaid consultant. It was not redemption. It was rebuilding. Every week, letters still came. Some offered forgiveness, others advice. But the ones that mattered most were the silent ones, the paintings sent by students from the Veterans Art Center. Canvases filled with color, with honesty, with the same light that Lila used to chase. Each one reminded him of what she had taught him without ever needing to say the words. One morning, while sweeping the community hall, he heard a familiar voice behind him. "You missed a spot." He turned. Lila stood there, sunlight cutting through the doorway behind her. She looked different, calmer, grounded. A faint streak of blue paint marked her hand. "I thought you went back to California," he said, almost afraid she was not real. "I did. For a while. I helped open a small studio there for veterans who could not travel. We called it the Honest Studio." He smiled, the name cutting through him like warmth. "That sounds like you." "It was your phrase first," she said softly. For a moment, neither spoke. Then she glanced around the center. "You are still here, fixing things that are not yours." "I broke them," he admitted. "It seems fair to help repair what I can." She nodded, looking at the wall where volunteers had pinned messages from families who had received help through the new program. "You know, when I left, I thought you would disappear into another company, another version of yourself. I did not think you would stay here." "Guntis." "I did disappear," he said quietly, "but not into money, into humility." Her eyes softened. "Maybe that is what you were meant to find." They spent the afternoon cleaning, talking about ordinary things: the weather, the classes, the smell of paint that never quite left her hands. There were no grand declarations, no apologies rehearsed for the camera, just two people who had learned how to speak without performing. Before she left, she handed him a folded flyer. "The Veterans Art Center is reopening next week. They asked if you would speak. They want to hear about honesty." He looked at the paper, unsure. "I do not know if I have the right." She smiled gently. "You earned it the moment you stopped pretending you were perfect." The following Friday, the hall was filled with paintings, abstract bursts of color, portraits of quiet courage. Lila stood near the back as Adrian stepped onto the small stage. He paused before speaking, scanning the faces in front of him. "I used to believe that success was the opposite of failure," he began. "Now I know that indifference is the opposite of both. The only thing that saves us is caring enough to begin again." The crowd fell silent. Lila's eyes met his across the room. No smiles, no promises, only understanding, the kind of connection that needed no script. After the event, he found her outside beneath the blooming cherry trees. "You were right," he said. "Honesty hurts less when it is shared." "And love?" she asked softly. He hesitated, then smiled. "Love is what makes the truth worth saying." They stood there as petals fell around them, brushing against their shoulders like small pieces of forgiveness. The city moved on, but for that quiet moment, time seemed to pause, holding them in the simple grace of two people who had learned to live without pretending. Summer arrived gently, carrying the scent of rain and new beginnings. The Veterans Arts Center was now alive every weekend, filled with the hum of laughter, brushes tapping, and the soft rhythm of conversation. Lila's students were painting murals along the outer wall, each color a fragment of recovery, each stroke a small act of courage. Adrian had not spoken to the press in months. He no longer needed to explain who he was. The public had moved on to new stories, but the people who mattered, the ones who had seen his change, still came to him quietly, asking for advice, for help, for truth. On a warm Saturday afternoon, he arrived at the center carrying a box of supplies. Lila was outside, standing on a ladder, painting the last line of a quote across the mural. He watched her for a moment before speaking. "You are missing a word," he said with a small smile. She looked down. "Which one?" "The word is. You wrote, 'Honesty makes the world better,' but you forgot who that honesty belongs to." She laughed. "Then climb up and finish it." He did. Together they painted the last word, side by side, their hands brushing against the wet wall. When it was done, they stepped back to read the full sentence. "Honesty makes the world better for all of us." Later, the students gathered to celebrate. Music played from a small speaker, and the smell of grilled food filled the air. Adrian and Lila sat on a bench near the mural, watching the sunset burn gold behind the skyline. "You know," she said quietly, "when this all started, I thought we were just pretending to help each other." "So did I," he replied. "But somewhere between the pretending and the pain, something real found us." She turned to face him. "What happens now?" He looked at her for a long moment before answering. "Now we stop calling it a contract." She smiled, understanding the weight of his words. There was no need for rings or ceremonies. The commitment had already been written in everything they had survived. As twilight deepened, the first drops of rain began to fall, gentle and cool. Lila stood, reaching out her hand. "Come on," she said softly. "Let us get everyone inside before the storm." He took her hand, and together they led the group toward the shelter of the building. Children laughed, veterans hurried to cover their paintings, and for the first time in a long time, Adrian felt peace. Not the peace that comes from control, but the kind that grows quietly inside when one has nothing left to hide. Inside the doorway, Lila looked back at him, her eyes catching the glow of the mural through the rain. "You remember what you told me that first night?" she asked. He nodded. "I said this is not love, it is logistics." She smiled. "You were wrong. It was always love. It just took us a while to recognize it." The thunder rolled softly overhead as the door closed behind them. Outside, the mural glistened under the rain, colors blending into one another until every word looked like it was painted from the same light. And in that final quiet, the world felt honest again.